my good friend Karamat and dear friends. I very much endorse what the two earlier speakers have spoken, and therefore I will try and get directly into the topic that has been allotted. I get the feeling that this is the beginning of the technical sessions. What you have heard until now is an overview, a political economy understanding of globalization and the reality of South Asia, especially the militarization part, which Karamat has been arguing against in one forum after another for several decades. And it is this commonality that has brought us together. As you notice from the schedule of work to be done, this morning session is devoted to public interest litigation primarily. And then you go on to many other technical sessions: gender, torture, criminal justice, disability, labor laws, minority rights, Dalit rights, health rights, child rights, right to food, and the lawyers' movement. It's good to keep this overview in mind, the totality of what you're going to do for the next few days, so that we are aware and conscious of the fact that on the one hand, this whole exercise is intended to look at legal processes, and I think from the calendar, from the schedule, quite heavily so. And that's why I suppose the majority of participants here are also people from a legal background. Of course, situated, contextualized against the rubric of human rights and the reality. Colin Gonsalves, who has been the prime mover of HRLN, when he invited me, he particularly asked me to make some references to the Indian Constitution and then to link it up with public interest litigation. So I will try and do that, and I'll try and do it in lesser time than what was originally allotted, so that I can make sure that Assad and others from South Asian countries also have a time. I think by the time if we come to lunch, we should have an opportunity to look at how public interest litigation is developing in different parts of South Asia. India certainly is one country where public interest litigation is a major arena of activity for legal activists, especially those who are connected with social activism. I think it is interesting to see the interrelationship between developments on the social, economic, cultural and political side in relation to our respective societies. And when we talk of developments, one is also thinking in terms of the paradigm of development, the model of development. So I think it's useful to keep this in mind. And when we look at the different countries, to keep, checking what is that base of socio-economic, cultural and political atmosphere. And then to also link it up with the legal system and the judiciary. So that is the sort of backdrop against which I will try and share some thoughts. So when we are looking at these developments, I think the most common thing across South Asia is the fact that neoliberal growth model has taken over the whole of South Asia, with perhaps the exception of Bhutan, as Karamat was pointing out. Bhutan is one country where they seem to be conscious that quality of life is superior to parameters of growth. But I think in all other countries, they struggle for growth. They may be achieving it in different degrees, but that is what drives the political elite of the country. So that's the hegemony that prevails in South Asia. And against that hegemony, when we are talking of social movements, by and large, we are trying to create a counter-hegemony. How to challenge the hegemony of the established order. And so if that is the relationship between social movements and the elites, then where does public interest litigation fit in? What role does public interest litigation play in relation to on the one hand, the hegemony of the development model, and on the other hand, the counter-hegemony which a large number of social movements would like to realize. I would like friends in this room to keep that aspect in mind. And while we are talking of public interest litigation, in that context, I think it's also useful to look at the judiciary a bit differently. I would invite you to consider what has been the role of the judiciary. The judiciary, after all, is a powerful institution, and at very many moments of crisis, the judiciary is put to the test. And what do you expect the judiciary to do? What has been their past? In India, I'm keen to point out to you what has been the past of the judiciary, what is the present of the judiciary, and what is therefore likely to be the future of the judiciary. And so in that sense, I think it's good to look at these different institutions, these different processes, and these different instrumentalities of the law that we use. PIL is only one instrumentality of the law. There are other instrumentalities that we use. In India, certainly if you're looking at the constitutional framework, the whole fancy, the whole expectation is that change can be achieved through a rule of law model. And when we talk of a rule of law model, then the assumption is either constitutional law or statutory law or case law. All this is going to contribute in order to bring about that social change. For us, and I think I won't be wrong in saying for us, I take it that we are closer to the social movements. And so when we look at it from the social movements, how do we situate and understand this reality? I will therefore, begin by sharing a few words about the Constitution. I'm one of those, during my student days, my pet hobby was to analyze the class character of the Indian Constitution. Kamal was making some references to that. But something happened in India when the BJP government was in power. They appointed a commission to review the Constitution. And I must say from that moment onwards, my focus in relation to the Constitution has shifted. Because that was one occasion, fortunately the President of India at that time was K.R. Narayanan. K.R. Narayanan is a brilliant Dalit intellectual, a follower of Ambedkar, a student of Professor Lasky, and so he was an extraordinary president. In the Central Hall of Parliament, there was a meeting connected with a review of the Constitution of India. A commission was appointed. So on the one hand, a former Chief Justice, Justice M.N. Venkatachalaya, he was seated, and on the other hand, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the then Prime Minister, and the President of India in the middle. And the President of India made his views clear that it's all very well that you are thinking of reviewing the Constitution, but you shall not touch the basic features of the Constitution. Now it's important, I think, for us to understand what the basic features of the Constitution is. I'm not going to do that exercise now, but I am of the view that that inaugural session in the Central Hall of Parliament resulted in the stillbirth of the proposed commission to review the Constitution. And so I'm one of those who subscribes to the view that if you try to rewrite the Constitution of India in order to make it more progressive just now, if you try to rewrite it on the basis of the strength of the intellectuals and those legal experts, it will be a much worse Constitution than what we have. So I am 100% opposed to any attempt to take a relook at the Constitution, not because it does not require a relook, but a Constitution making process is always a political process. And the political climate that we have in this country today does not permit the evolution of a Constitution which is better than what we had. And why is that so? That brings me to a very important link. And that link is that the Constitution of India, above all, is a product of the independence movement of India. And the independence movement of India is an extraordinary movement. It's a very powerful movement. I am of the view that when people are struggling for independence, the longer the duration of the struggle, the healthier, the richer the output is. And so fortunately in India, we had a struggle which lasted for several decades. The Congress Party is a very old party, and at that time the Congress Party of that time is very different from the Congress Party of this time. The Congress Party of that time was like a platform, and that's the reason, a platform into which you could bring in people with different ideologies, different political tendencies. There were extremists on it, there were Gandhians on it, there were communists on it, there were social democrats in it, there were capitalists in it. So it was a platform that brought together different types of people. And by virtue of the fact that the Indian subcontinent at that time, Pakistan and Bangladesh included, we had experienced colonial exploitation of an unprecedented nature. And as a result of that exploitation, the people of India from all walks of life were united against the British. And as a result, the Indian independence movement had three goals. The first goal was an anti-imperialist goal. Throw the British out. We don't want colonial rule anymore. And that goal was 100% achieved. The second goal was we don't want foreign goods in this country. We don't want foreign capital in this country. We don't want our industries to be built by the foreigners. And even the second goal was greatly achieved in India. I think for a scholarly discussion on this aspect, you might like to take a look at what was the scenario in other parts of South Asia in reference to the anti-foreign foreign sector. In relation to the anti-foreign capital dimension, I think it would be worth examining what is the situation in other parts of South Asia. The third aspect, I mentioned to you anti-imperialism, anti-foreign capital. The third aspect was anti-feudalism. And it is in relation to anti-feudalism that the independence movement achieved the least. And I think that is what we inherited, and many of our weaknesses today originate from the fact that the feudal order is very much in place. India is considered to be an advanced capitalist country, but that advanced capitalism is in the nature of pockets which are superimposed upon a largely feudal hinterland. And that reality continues today. And therefore, on the one hand, you might be able to launch satellites in space, but on the other hand, you have bonded labor in the villages. You have forced labor in the villages. You have child labor in the villages. You have women who are treated as the private property of the men. And so all feudal practices also continue. And so this is an aspect of the independence movement and the constitution making, which I think is useful for us to remember. So yes, the Constitution of India is a very elaborate document, and I must quickly jump in order to say